In this video, I'm going to talk about how to choose which equation to use to answer a question. Now, a lot of students find it very difficult or very confusing to decide which of these three SUVAT equations to use to answer a question. Now, it can be very confusing because there's lots to think about, but it's actually a lot more simpler than you think. One thing that all three of these SUVAT equations have in common is that they involve four quantities. Okay, they all have four quantities. So in here we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and obviously t is the same here. Okay, and to decide which one to use, you have to read the question carefully. So you have to find out what information they have given you in the question and what is it that you're trying to find. Okay, and it's really simple. You have to find three quantities that you know in the question and one that you don't. Okay, so three quantities that you need to find that you already have information for and one that you don't. So for example, if they give you the final velocity, the initial velocity, the time, and you have to find acceleration, then you would go for this equation, okay? Because you don't have any information about the displacement, or they haven't asked you to find the displacement, so it can't be this equation, this one, because this has displacement, and it can't be this one, because you don't have that information. So that only leaves this one as the correct one to use. Okay. If, for example, you're trying to find the acceleration and they've only given you information on the final velocity, initial velocity and the displacement, but you have no information for time, then you would go for this one. Okay, because this is the only equation that doesn't involve time. Okay, this one has time, this one has time, so it can't be these two. You don't have that information, so there won't be any use to you to use these two equations. You won't be able to find the answer. Okay, so if you had to find the acceleration and you don't have information on time, but you have information for the displacement, the final velocity and the initial velocity, then this is the one that you would go for. Okay, now I want you to have a think when you would use this equation. Okay, so think about what type of question you would be given and what quantities you would have in order to use this equation. Okay, so have a think. Now, in this equation, it doesn't have final velocity. Okay, this is the only equation that doesn't have final velocity. This one has the final velocity, this one has final velocity, but this one doesn't. So if the question is asking, say for example, what the acceleration is, and they haven't given you any information on the final velocity, but they have given you information on the initial velocity, the time, and the displacement, then you would use this equation. Okay, so again, you have three known quantities, 2 and 3, and then you have one unknown. Okay, and it's the same for all three equations. It's important to remember also that sometimes they might not say explicitly what the initial velocity or the final velocity is. They might say an object starts at rest, or an object slows down and comes to a complete stop. Okay, so whenever you have that information talking about an object at rest or object being stationary, then you should always just think, right, if something is not moving, then it doesn't have velocity, so the value must be 0. Okay, so the initial velocity, if it's at rest, if it's starting at rest, would be 0 meters per second, for example, and if an object was slowing down and coming to a stop, then we can say that the final velocity is 0 meters per second. So that's another thing to be on the lookout for. Okay, so I hope that helps. Again, have a few practices yourself with some questions and decide which one of these SUVAT equations fits the bill. Okay, good luck.